society today sees it as a social issue.
So my question would be, should we still see this one as a moral issue since Jesus sees this is a moral issue?
Okay, that's a good question, and I would say we see it as both. I think there is no doubt that when you take a marriage vow, particularly if you're taking this marriage vow in the church, before God and these witnesses, and you're being married in the church, you are making vows and you're making promises which you are expected to keep. And that's why I say marriage is a very serious business. And when you get married, you're going to work on that marriage for your entire life. Never take it for granted, because lots of people, even when they get into their 60s and 70s, are getting divorced. A lot of people are getting divorced when the children leave the nest. And the husbands and wives suddenly discover they have nothing in common except their kids. And when the kids aren't there, I don't even know who you are. And if they don't really work on that marriage, it can come apart. So I think in that sense, if you make a vow before God, and you say, I am marrying this woman or this man, and we're going to marry for life, and you break that vow, that is a moral issue. Or if you commit adultery, or commit abuse, beat your wife, or abuse her physically or verbally or whatever. These are moral issues, and there are also moral issues coming from divorce with, as I say, single parents. Single mothers are generally really struggling economically to provide for their children. And if you look at most of the single mothers, they have a lower income, they're stressed out with work and trying to raise a family, and this kind of thing, perpetuates the children. I was shocked to discover that some of the people I know today who are living together without being married. And some of them are very frank. I said, well, why are you doing this? I mean, these are Christians. These are not people. And I said, well, our parents are both divorced. And we don't want to go through a divorce. So we want to live together to make sure it's going to stick. And if we really think we're going to stick, then we'll get married. But we don't want to go through a divorce with all of the legal hassle and all of the hatred, and who's going to get this and who's going to get that, and child support, and all these kind of things. They don't want to go through that. So that's the one thing. I think there's definitely a moral dimension to it. But I think also it is a social issue in society because of the stresses that society put on marriage. And we have stresses on marriage that are unbelievable. One of the ones that is very unusual, I read about it in the newspaper, of a business executive who required his vice president to have breakfast with him every single morning in order to plan the business day. And the wife of the vice president was having a cancer operation, and he didn't keep that appointment for breakfast, and the CEO fired him. Now that's a stress on marriage. But there are people who put their jobs ahead of their families and ahead of their wives. This is a big problem in Japan. And you might be interested to know now that young women in Korea, I don't know about Taiwan, but in Korea and Japan are choosing not to get married at all. And they're also choosing not to have children. They say, I want to have a dog. I don't want to send the puppies to college. But this is a big problem. Question here.
The social issue and the moral issue, which one?
I think they're both important.
Follow which one?
I would say we should follow the moral issue, but the problem is sometimes the social issue gets in the way.
But we say that we want the divorce, and who give us the permission?
Well, okay. Some of the pastors I know who have gotten divorced have really struggled with this. They say, I'm a pastor. I shouldn't be getting a divorce. I mean, I'm the one who is supposed to be setting the example for the congregation. I'm the one who's supposed to be setting the example for my people. But the marriage is simply not working. And what are we going to do? And so they choose to get a divorce. Whether that's the right decision or the wrong decision, I don't know. I'll tell you this much. It seems to be very easy for people to make a judgment until it happens in your family. If it's your son or your daughter or even you. But when it begins to get close, and I found this the same issue with the gay issue. or with any of these moral issues that we really debate, the abortion issue, these kind of things, it's easy to make a judgment until it gets very close to home and it's your own family member. Then you begin to be, it begins to get more fuzzy, and you certainly begin to be less judgmental, more forgiving, and more loving. And I think that's the thing we need to do. If we hold up these standards, that's good. But we must also realize God is not only a God of law, God is also a God of grace. And God is forgiving, and God is loving. And I think that's one area where the church this change has been very good, that we have not been completely judgmental. This is the problem of the Catholic Church. That Pope Francis is trying to change. He's trying to say, let's not be so judgmental. Let's show some more love, show love and compassion. So another question here, and then one over here.
Okay. Yeah. So if I have a follow-up question, so I totally agree that we should be more forgiving in terms of all these kind of issues. But there's some dilemma between teaching and not being too judgmental. So do you kind of some suggestion or comment about if I were a pastor, but I'm not? But I mean, if in church, if we have to teach something, but how do we figure out we should teach something but not being judgmental? I think the line is a little bit.
I think that is a very narrow line. I would agree. It's difficult. You have to take it case by case. I've been a pastor and also a university professor of international students. And believe me, when you're a dean of an international graduate school, you get every problem in the world that the students bring in. They call my wife, I can say this, she's gone out of the room, they call her their holy mother, because she has been, and we have had some of our students have these exact problems we're talking about here. I think we have to hold up Christian standards and say, this is what the church believes, this is what we Christians believe, this is what Jesus teaches, but we also realize we are human beings, we are weak, we are sinners, we are not perfect, we make mistakes, but God can forgive and redeem and save us from those mistakes. And that's, I think, where we have. Now, sometimes you have to be judgmental. If you have someone who has really committed adultery and then goes out and does it again. This is sort of like I knew a pastor in a church, and it was a big church. And it was an evangelical church, so you couldn't say it was all because of those liberals. And he had an improper relationship with a woman in the church, so he was removed from that pastorate and sent to another pastorate. Guess what? It happened again. They sent him to a third pastorate. It happened again. He should have been defrocked. His ordination should have been removed. He should have been disciplined. But this kind of thing, so you have to be forgiving, but to a point. And then when you see people are taking advantage of that, then you have to come down hard in judgment. And I think that's true, particularly of abuse. If you have a spousal abuse, you have to really be hard on that, because that can scar a person's life or scar children's life for their entire, the rest of their life. It can be terribly damaging. So it's a fine line. And sometimes the pastor can't make that decision alone. You have to bring in a marriage counselor. You may have to bring in a lawyer. In some cases, you may even have to bring in the police. I knew of one marriage that ended in divorce where the brother found out that the husband was hitting the wife, and he just called the police and had the guy arrested. He said, I'm not going to let that guy beat up on my daughter, my sister. And these were church people, Christians. He said, I'm not going to allow that. And he had the guy arrested. Well, the marriage obviously didn't last. She remarried, and now she has a very happy marriage. And so, we make mistakes, and that's the way it is.
Go with me, Emma.
Sometimes people don't realize they have mistakes. Sometimes people don't realize they have mistakes. So if they don't, maybe they realize that they don't want to admit it to it. So sometimes we are not brave enough to admit it to either or to the people. But sometimes I think from my own experience is that God's will kind of open my mind and bravery in front of my maybe the church brother, sister, etc. So every time from that I learn my lesson, then I become more happier and overcome all those problems.
I think that's a good question. You know, sometimes when we have these kind of problems, we try to hide it, pretend it isn't there. And one of the things that's important about the church, if the church is functioning as the church should be functioning, it is a Christian community that is there to give support. And we should be able to be free to go to the pastor or to go to a deacon or a deaconess or one of the elders or people in the church who are in authority who are able to give us help. Now that also means that the people who are doing this need to keep confidentiality. This is very important. There's absolutely no place in the church when you have counseling for malicious gossip and so forth. What happens between the person coming for counseling and the counselor is strictly confidential and must be kept that way. Because churches are great rumor mills. You all know that. Gossip and rumors can spread so fast. But you really need to be in confidentiality there. But we should support our brothers and sisters in the church when they have problems in their marriage, when there are problems in the family, when there are problems with these kind of issues. That's what the church is there for to do. This is what we mean by the communion of saints. I believe in the communion of saints. The Creed talks about the Holy Catholic Church, the universal church, and the communion